Long Tan, Phuoc Tuy Province, South Vietnam. August 18, 1966, 3:40 p.m. Corporal Bob Buick of D Company, 6th Battalion, Royal Australian Regiment, crouched in the rubber plantation as monsoon rain hammered down like artillery. His SLR rifle was slick with water, his jungle greens soaked through, and somewhere in the deluge, 2,500 Viet Cong were closing in on his position. D Company numbered 108 men. The math was simple, brutal, suicidal. But Buick wasn't thinking about the odds. He was thinking about last night. Last night, back at Nui Dat Base, he'd shared 4 stubbies of Victoria Bitter with his section. Not a bender, just 4 beers, rationed carefully, handed out by the quartermaster like ammunition. They'd sat in the damp heat, talking shit, laughing at the Americans' complaints about their near-beer rations, that pathetic 3.2% alcohol swill that tasted like carbonated regret. The Australians drank real beer, full strength, cold when they could get it, warm when they couldn't. The Americans thought they were mad. What the Americans didn't understand, what Buick understood as he checked his magazines and prepared to hold this position against an entire regiment, was that those 4 beers weren't about getting drunk. They were about staying sane, about maintaining the rhythms of normal life in an abnormal place, about trust. The Viet Cong opened fire. The Battle of Long Tan had begun. The Americans would learn soon enough. The Australians weren't drinking because they were reckless. They were drinking because it made them better soldiers. And the body count would prove it. When Australian troops arrived in South Vietnam in 1965, American commanders watched with barely concealed skepticism as quartermaster trucks unloaded not just ammunition and rations, but pallets of beer. Real beer. Full-strength lagers like Victoria Bitter, Two Haze, Swan. The same stuff soldiers drank in pubs back home. 2 cans per man per day when in base areas. Carefully rationed and controlled, but unmistakably, undeniably alcoholic. To American officers raised on the post-prohibition military culture of temperance, it looked like chaos waiting to happen. "We thought they were out of their minds," recalled Major James Shelton of the 173rd Airborne Brigade. "Here we were, fighting a war, and the Aussies were running what looked like a damn beer garden in the combat zone. Our boys got near beer if they were lucky. Basically soda pop. The Australians were drinking full-strength lagers like they were on vacation." The U.S. military had banned hard alcohol in forward areas since World War II. The reasoning was sound, at least on paper. Alcohol impaired judgment, slowed reaction time, and compromised unit effectiveness. In a guerrilla war where ambush could come at any moment, intoxication could mean death. General Westmoreland made his position clear. The introduction of alcohol into forward combat areas presents unacceptable risks. The Australians ignored this entirely. Their policy, inherited from British military tradition and refined through the Malayan emergency, was radically different. Soldiers received 2 full-strength beers per day. Officers received a whiskey ration. Beer was stored in refrigerated containers and distributed through official channels, controlled but normalized. "The Americans looked at us like we were alcoholics," remembered Warrant Officer Reg Bandy. "They couldn't understand why we'd waste logistics capacity on beer when we could be moving ammunition. They didn't get that the beer was ammunition, just a different kind." The cultural gap was enormous. Americans saw discipline as abstinence, control through restriction. Australians saw discipline as moderation, control through trust. When Australian soldiers sat in their hoochies after patrol, drinking their rationed stubbies and playing cards, Americans saw indulgence. Australians saw normalcy. "We weren't trying to get drunk," explained Private Peter Hines. 2 beers in that heat didn't even touch you. It was about having something that reminded you you were still human. The Yanks had Coke and ice cream. We had beer. But the skepticism went beyond culture. American commanders genuinely believed the policy was dangerous. The long-term implications for combat effectiveness remain questionable, one U.S. report noted. The assumption was clear. Eventually, the beer would bite them. Eventually, the Australians would pay for their laxness with blood. The Americans were about to discover they had it exactly backward. The Australian system emerged from hard experience in Malaya between 1948 and 1960. During that emergency, Australian forces discovered something unexpected. Units with beer rations had better morale, fewer discipline problems, and stronger cohesion. Lieutenant Colonel Colin Kahn documented the effect in a 1959 report. The beer ration served multiple purposes. It created structured social time that reinforced bonds. It provided leadership opportunities for NCOS to demonstrate judgment. It maintained a connection to normal life that prevented psychological deterioration. Most critically, it demonstrated institutional trust in the soldier. The key was control. This wasn't a free-for-all. 2 cans maximum. 0 alcohol during active ops. Immediate prohibition for poor judgment. Brigadier O.D. Jackson explained the philosophy. Quote, 9. The American reaction was telling. When Australians requested logistical support for beer, it was denied. Quote, 10 recalled Captain Trevor Hayes. Quote, 11. The first test came early. In June 1965, the 1st Battalion RAR conducted operations alongside the U.S. 173rd Airborne. After weeks of patrols, the Australians returned to base and immediately received their beer rations. American officers watched nervously, expecting discipline to collapse. It didn't. The Australians drank their 2 beers, played cards, wrote letters, and went to sleep. The next morning, they were up at 05:30 for PT, weapons sharp, ready for tasking. That's when I started to wonder if maybe we had it wrong, recalled Sergeant Michael Torres of the 173rd. These guys drank their beers and acted like it was the most normal thing in the world. And the next day, they were sharper than my guys, more focused, less complaining. The pattern repeated throughout 1965 and 1966. Instead of disaster, American observers noticed remarkably low rates of substance abuse and strong unit cohesion among the Australians. Maybe the beer wasn't the problem. Maybe it was the solution. Then came Long Tan, and the questions ended. August 18, 1966. D Company walked into a massive ambush, outnumbered 23-1 in a monsoon storm. Standard doctrine called for withdrawal, but Major Harry Smith held his ground. Smith recalled. Quote, 15. This was the hidden effect. Beer time allowed leaders to observe their soldiers. Corporal Bob Buick's section was down to 6 men. I remember thinking about the night before, Buick said. We'd been having our beers and Jacko had been nervous. We talked it through, calm-like. By the time we finished those beers, Jacko was solid again. Now, in the middle of this shitstorm, I looked over and there he was, calm as anything. At 4:15 p.m., Smith called for artillery support from the New Zealand battery at Nui Dat. The gunners fired 3,000 rounds, much of it danger close, within 100 meters of Australian positions. We could trust them to drop shells on our heads because we knew them, explained Sergeant Bob Kearney. Some of those gunners, we'd had beers with them. You know a man's judgment over a beer. You know his judgment with a firing solution. The battle raged until nightfall. D Company held. They inflicted approximately 245 confirmed kills on the enemy while losing 18 men, a kill ratio of roughly 15-1. When the news reached American commands, the reaction was disbelief. These numbers can't be right, wrote Colonel Francis Breath. How does a company hold against a regiment? The answer started becoming clear when American officers observed the beer policy in action. The beer ration creates a daily ritual, wrote Captain James Sullivan. It's a controlled decompression. Our boys come off patrol wired, and we have nothing to help them step down. More importantly, the NCOs are watching. They're learning their soldiers in a way we never do because we've made socializing with alcohol taboo. Sullivan added the kicker. I never once saw an Australian soldier drunk in a combat zone. Because the system is designed around moderation and trust, not prohibition and temptation. By late 1966, American commanders faced a growing problem. Their troops wanted what the Australians had. Black market sales climbed. I caught one of my guys trying to trade a Claymore mine for a 6-pack of VB, recalled Lieutenant David Patterson. A Claymore mine. That's when I realized prohibition wasn't working. The U.S. tried limited trials of increased beer rations in 1967, but they failed. Why? because they increased supply, but maintained the weak 3.2% beer and the Prohibition-era attitude. We gave them more beer, but still treated them like children, explained Major Robert Chen. The Australians had made beer part of professional culture. We just made more beer available. The Australians refined their system. By 1968, it was a sophisticated tool. Junior NCOs used beer time for leadership. Psychiatrists documented stress relief benefits. Commanders used consumption patterns as early warning systems for trouble. And culturally, it anchored soldiers to home. "We're not running a temperance society," said Lieutenant Colonel Philip Bennett. "We're running a professional military force. The beer is a tool." The enemy misunderstood it completely. An NVA intelligence report noted, Australian soldiers receive alcohol rations, indicating low discipline. Units that consume alcohol are assessed as easier targets. This was catastrophically wrong. The Australians drinking beer at Nui Dat were the same ones who executed the devastating ambush at Bin Ba, killing 107 VC with 0 friendly casualties. "We thought the alcohol meant weakness," a former VC fighter recalled. "We learned differently." By 1969, the pattern was undeniable. Australian units consistently outperformed American ones in discipline. Courts-martial rates were 60% lower. Drug abuse was minimal. Retention was higher. Major Michael Prendergast summarized. "The policy works not despite the alcohol, but because the alcohol is integrated into a professional framework of trust." While Australian units maintained effectiveness through the 1968 Tet Offensive and beyond, the U.S. military faced a crisis. By 1970, drug use was rampant. 30% of soldiers had tried heroin. Fragging incidents were increasing. The prohibition policy had created a vacuum filled by dangerous substances. "We took away beer and our boys turned to heroin," wrote American Lieutenant Thomas Morrison. "The Australians gave their boys beer and got professional soldiers. We thought we were being disciplined. They thought we were being stupid. They were right." In 1973, the U.S. Army War College concluded that Australian alcohol policies contributed to superior cohesion, while American prohibition contributed to discipline deterioration. General Creighton Abrams later wrote privately, "We got the beer question wrong. We treated our soldiers like children, and some responded by acting like children. The Australians treated theirs like professionals, and got professional behavior. It was never about the beer. It was about respect." Long Tan, August 19, 1966. Dawn. Corporal Buick walked through the plantation, counting bodies. That night, back at Nui Dat, the quartermaster issued rations. 2 cans per man. Cold. The survivors of D Company drank them slowly, remembering the 18 who wouldn't drink with them again, Buick recalled. The Australian beer policy proved a fundamental truth. Trust generates discipline more effectively than prohibition. In 2006, survivors of Long Tan gathered for a reunion. Someone brought Victoria Bitter. They drank 2 beers each and remembered. Quote 41, said Bob Buick. The Americans laughed at Australian soldiers drinking beer in combat zones. Then they watched those soldiers win impossible battles. The laughter stopped. The respect began. And somewhere in the jungle, a truth was proven with blood and beer. Trust your soldiers, and they'll prove worthy of it. Doubt them, and they'll prove you right about that too.